All right, let's do some viewer questions. First one is from Hand Solo, not Han Solo or Han Solo, Hand Solo. I drink and I am dependent on opioid, which apparently is the plural of opioid. I always wear hearing protection. What the fuck? I don't ask for this, only I did. Who's driving this thing anyway? I want to go home. Okay, I'll watch the video now. Thanks, Angelo. That wasn't sarcastic. That's from the video called The Root of Self. Let's see here. This is from James. Noticed the self-jeopardizing mechanism on the way out of the mind maze. Seems a lot is rooted in shame from early childhood. Yeah, if you really feel into this, you may find, I found, and I know others who have found, that as soon as you started forming a sense of self, or shortly after you started forming a sense of self, you formed a sense of something's wrong with me. I might say this, when we first start forming a self, we probably don't really have memory, or, we're 18 months old. So there's just that kind of substratum on which self-perceptions can be built, like a foundation is set. But it doesn't really have much to it. If you remember as a child, even sometimes intense experiences or things that could be traumatic, maybe didn't really feel traumatic because you were just so wide open and you weren't filtering and so forth. But there is that kind of matrix of self that's there, that's able to collect experiences. And who knows why some are traumatic and some aren't, but at some point you start to accumulate these moments and experiences where something about the reflection you're getting from another person, this could be some violent act, it could be some simple misunderstanding, it could just be something loud that happens, but somehow you solidify that sense of a self into something that feels uncomfortable. But because it's the sense of self that's holding on to that, it feels like something's wrong with me. That's probably the simplest mechanism I can describe around this, but it does get far more complex, obviously, when we start having abstract thoughts and so forth about ourselves and how we relate to others and these very complex social paradigms. Then the shame gets actually quite buried, and we start to build on top of that these avoidant mechanisms so that we have different ways of thinking about ourselves in the world that actually covers up the earlier wounds, let's say. But I think it's pretty accurate to say that as soon as there's a residue starting to accumulate on the sense of self, it's going to feel like shame, or it's going to feel like something's off. Another way of saying that would be that the sense of self, the filtering that allows us to feel separate, discrete, time-bound, with a sense of agency, itself is an illusion that makes us feel, well, separate, obviously. It makes us feel distinct and separate and apart from infinity, right? Apart from eternity, timelessness, which is eternity. And that apartness, that being kicked out of the Garden of Eden, so to speak, or being apart from what is real, is fundamentally uncomfortable. There's something about that just doesn't feel right. And because it's being interpreted through the body-mind, or through the mind as a self, then it's going to feel like something's not right with me. So all of this is totally innocent, and it's actually impersonal on its own side, or beyond the veil of the self. But when we're looking through that veil and we're identifying with the whole experience, including what seems like a history of me, then it's going to be uncomfortable in that way. It's going to feel like something's wrong with me. So great comment. This one's from M. Beatty. I'd love if you would speak to someone like me who has primarily visual thoughts and auditory thoughts. I think most people have primarily visual and auditory thoughts, but let me see what else you're going to say here. It's almost like walking through a daydream. Everything I see, the mind is automatically making an association in a visual way, which leads to an immersive story where I am seeing, hearing, and speaking or commenting in the thought dimension. Okay. So this, you could call this perhaps hyperphantasia. You've heard of aphantasia, where someone doesn't have mental images created by the mind. They don't have a visual memory, essentially. Or it can't actually, maybe they have a visual memory, but they can't just conjure the imagination of a visual experience or something like that. There's variations of that. But the opposite would be hyperphantasia, where you can see your thoughts more clearly than you see the three-dimensional world. That's not the same thing as not actually knowing the difference, right? Not knowing the difference is hallucination, and that is a different thing. But for someone who is so bombarded with thoughts all the time, and they're very bright, very enticing, let's say, then yeah, you might call that hyperphantasia. And of course, it can be uncomfortable. So, she continues to say it's just a thought, and I try to ground in the present through sensation like the soles of my feet. But it's so hard because it's so deceptive. The visual thoughts weave right into the actual visual field. It drives me crazy. Second to that, and okay, I get what you're saying here. The answer is a pretty simple one. I do have a good answer for you, or at least what I consider to be a good answer. And that is, from this stage of things, it's kind of like trying to jump to non-duality. It's trying to have a deeper realization before you've had the initial realization, the initial shift. So I would say, don't put your attention in the senses as a coping mechanism, because it's not going to stay there. It's just going to be pulled back into the mind very, very quickly. And those strong vasanas, those strong reactive thought patterns and so forth are going to be, they're just going to have such a pull to them, such a momentum, you're not going to be able to stay away from them. So you're kind of trying to dissociate from thought, which isn't going to work. So rather, I would actually have you turn your attention around into that space of thought, into the substratum of thought. What is it that thoughts appear in, right? Consciousness. So now I can talk to you about consciousness, and that could just become a whole other series of thoughts. And this happens all the time. People learn about this stuff, right? This isn't about learning. This is about direct experience or nothing at all. But at first it's going to happen. Like, I can talk about consciousness, and that can be incorporated into the thought stream, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about getting to the actual root of thought. What is the root of thought? What is the root of any feeling of being a thinker? You can discover that in direct experience. There are different ways to go about this, but that's what this whole channel is about, and that's what my book's about. So if you haven't seen my book, check my book out. And on this channel specifically, I would start with the basics of awakening, or even, that's the playlist, or even go to the playlist introductory series. Then go to awakening approaches and find something that works for you. There's a lot there, but you can find something that works for you, including something like what is Mu, or a one-pointed approach. There's a lot of ways to do inquiry and self-inquiry and so forth. But if you have this active of a mind and the thoughts are they have that much pull and they're that hypnotic, just putting your attention in the body or in sounds, it might work for a minute, but it's not going to stay working for you probably. Now, later on, when the mind is calm and the reactivity is calmed and the initial break in the spell of mind identification has occurred, now you're in a better place to start that kind of non-dual contemplation. So hopefully that helps. This one's from DVD Mon. Okay, question. Can you try to explain qualitatively how to let go of a thought and how that differs from pushing or pulling on a thought? Qualitatively. Yeah. First of all, you have to feel what it feels like to push or pull on a thought. Have you ever had a thought suddenly come up and you feel like your whole body reacts to the thought? Like a memory of something embarrassing, it's a common one, or a memory of something that makes you feel a strong emotion that's either anger or fear, or essentially a hidden thought there, or maybe not hidden, that says, I don't want to feel that. I don't want that thought to be here. It's like a thought just surprises you and you have a strong reaction to it. That's what it means to feel like you're pushing or pulling on a thought, but that'd be more like pushing, right? That's what it feels like. So first you have to actually recognize that this is happening, that you're reacting to your own thoughts. Yeah. Once you see that, then what you can do is gently and without too much added effort, of course, because you can make that worse by trying to dissociate from thoughts or force thoughts not to be there, or anything forceful within thought won't work, right? Don't go to war with your thoughts. Rather, knowing what it feels like to push or pull on thought. Pulling would be more like fantasy or getting carried away in the mind, purposely especially. Pushing feels like an aversion to thoughts, et cetera. And if you start to notice the signature, you'll see it's happening quite often. So then gently find a way that works for you, so you're not pushing and you're not pulling. You're kind of moving with the thought as it's forming and disforming, as it's arising and departing, right? In my book, I kind of talk about moving toward thought. That's one way of saying it, but don't worry about describing it. Find a way to actually move with thought such that there's no sense of pulling or pushing. Again, in reference to awakening, just like I mentioned to the last person who asked, or the last comment, ultimately this will become much, much clearer with a shift in identity. You may have had one, I don't know, but with a shift in identity, this usually gets way more clear. Because when we are not identified so fully with thoughts, then the pushing and pulling doesn't happen so automatically. When someone's fully identified with thoughts, the pushing and pulling is so constant and automatic that it can be hard to even sense that it's happening. That's why I was using those extreme examples. But once that spell is broken, initially at least, we don't feel so beaten up by our own thoughts. We don't feel so identified with our own thoughts. So it gets easier to start to investigate what it is within that thought space that feels like feels like you. What feels like you there? What feels like you right now? Yeah? What feels like you reacting to a thought? What makes you believe that a thought is apart from you in the first place? What is a thought even made out of? So you can really start to investigate all these much more closely. Before that spell is sort of broken, the mind-identified constant absorption into thoughts, before that's broken, it's really tricky to investigate in the ways I just talked about, because me saying that to you will become conceptual for you. So you have to get beyond conceptuality. Big, important first step, and many people don't do it. They can learn so much about this. I've seen it. I've seen people talking about this online and writing about it, where they've learned all the stuff and they've read all the stuff everyone writes, but just something about it really feels to me like they probably haven't even had that first shift. That's not always the case, of course, but it's not uncommon. So just know that, without that initial insight, all of this is either pretty academic or it's really elusive. So you have to really balance movement toward that first shift with this kind of work you're talking about of learning not to push and pull on thought. But it gets a lot easier after that. So hopefully that's helpful. This one comes from EW Afex. This reminds me of Rob Burbea. This is a video called Use These Two Moves to Escape from the Matrix, suggesting to gently regard the different aggregates as not me, not mine. It's in his book, Seeing That Frees. Yeah, I haven't read the book, but I've heard good things about it. This one's from Julie Matos. Angelo, I have a question. For many years now, I have been engaging in a particular version of this that goes like this. Some small negative thing happens, like I miss the bus, or something of that magnitude, and after the initial flash of disappointment, I say to myself something like, never mind, you never know, something good might come out of it, i.e. I may bump into a friend on the next bus. It doesn't matter whether something good actually happens. The thought is enough to dispel the initial reactivity, and then I forget about it. For context, I shifted 25 years ago and have much experience deep diving into emotions like grief. It is perfectly clear to me that the above strategy of mine is a trick. My question is it an acceptable one in the context of ongoing shadow work, or is there a distinction between reactivity over small things and deeper emotional states? It seems to me, without reading the rest of this, I can tell you my sense of it, especially if you had a shift 25 years ago, is really look into any buy-in into those kinds of coping mechanisms, because all of coping mechanisms are going to go. So I would actually rather you feel the frustration than tell yourself why you don't. Does that make sense? At this stage of things. I'll just keep it simple. I don't want to make that a complicated answer. All right. This is from Random Seed, same video. Metacognitive reflections about doing things properly and adjusting the introspective process was and sometimes is the most energy-sucking demon since I developed meditator's ego. When not seen and cuddled, it may take away the whole of joy of meeting with what actually is here. Metacognitive reflections about doing things properly and adjusting the introspective process. Yeah, if you're again, that's just another stream of thoughts. Really, it's another way of thinking when you're like, oh yeah, so that happened and now I'm going to do this. So next time I'll do that. And maybe I can kind of adjust this way. And here's something else that's going on with my process. It's just thoughts. Doesn't matter how nuanced or spiritual they are or cognitive they are. They're just thoughts, right? So much better just to stay experience close. Stay experience close with everything. Sounds, sensations, consciousness, thought. Yeah. Keep it simple. This one's from Giathroat. When I was reading the inquiry chapter of your book, Angelo, the where am I hit me in a different way while I was reading it. So I pause the reading and sit in meditation. I asked, where am I? And felt big goosebumps through my body and this roller coaster feeling in the stomach. I like it so far. I asked 3 or 4 times, and every time the goosebumps would come, then suddenly a big fear came with contraction in the chest and kicked me out with what was what felt like a subtle space. Okay. You've heard me talk about the fear barrier. That's the fear barrier. After I was kicked out, what remained with me was a warmth in my chest, not a fear during the rest of the day. Good. That surprised me. The fear felt so big. Since then, I've been feeling my chest a lot, shifting between warm and open and scared and heavy. Good. But now it's been 3 days straight, and I wake up with big sadness that I can't trace. This is all good, yeah. Today I kept bringing my attention to the chest, repeating where, and it did something. Then I would catch myself wandering in thoughts and daydreaming, which just felt like my defenses. I'm feeling the sadness now and investigating resistance around it. Yesterday I just felt it during the whole day, and it became like this melancholy painting everywhere. I wonder if you could help me orient myself. No, you're doing great. You don't need my help. Just keep doing what you're doing. This is starting to have its own momentum, it feels like. Yeah. Good. You're doing great. You're doing great. Just keep entering the mystery. Just keep your nose to nose with the mystery, right? Do you see how this is the unknown you're entering constantly? Yeah, you don't need advice. Keep at it. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't solidify. Don't conceptualize. You're doing good. Okay, that's all for now. I do read these comments periodically, so I appreciate it. I read most of them anyway, but I answer them periodically on video, and sometimes I answer them by text. So feel free to drop me comments anytime you want, and I appreciate your viewership.